Hello, everyone, and welcome to Professional
Recording in
Previews.
progress.
My name is Michael Lewis. I am joined here today by Michelle Jewell and Dr. Adrian Smith. And so, in just a second, we'll hear more about them and how they got to where they are in this career field. But if this is your first time joining us, a little bit about Professional Previews is that this program is designed to give you a look into the everyday lives of these STEAM professionals. And so at the end of the submitted questions that we get, so feel free to drop questions in the chat. You'll have a chance to unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras and talk directly to Michelle and Adrian. And also, in the meantime, you can turn on the auto-generated captions in Zoom if you need that. And so if you have questions, drop them in the chat and we will get ready to start with Michelle. All right.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, everybody, again, and welcome. So first I wanted to talk about who I am and what I do, and then we can talk about how I got there, which is itself a fun journey. So as you can see in the screens happening somewhere around you, one of the science communication gigs that I work is I do host regularly for Shark Week on the Discovery Channel, as well as other shark-related stuff. And that's related to my background as a marine biologist and also as a predator ecologist and studying predator-prey behavior. This is super fun. It's also an incredible amount of really, really hard work by the entire team to get out there and try and capture these really fascinating natural phenomena. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the key things that we're trying to capture in science communication. One of them that I'd like to talk about today is just the element of awe and getting people just fascinated by seeing a thing. And that's what a lot of the work in Discovery Channel does. But my main gig, my main job, and that's relevant to the museum today, is working at NC State University. And at NC State, I'm a science communicator for the Department of Applied Ecology. What does that mean? Well, essentially, I have everything that's external facing through the department comes through my office at one stage or another, whether that's helping students prepare for an interview or a podcast interview, helping with posters, writing up news releases, etc. So to give you a flavor of that this week, what I've done, and this is not to compete in the busy Olympics at all, but this week I finished one news release on some research that's coming out. I interviewed scientists about a different news release that's coming out in some future time. Went to the beehive lab and was with beehives all day, basically on Wednesday, with Brittany, who's in the audience. And we were taking pictures of bees and getting more information about the experiment that they're getting ready to set up. Interviewed interns, helped out some students, and then came up with a communications plan for a black bear research project that's going to be starting this summer too. All the while trying to find these really creative avenues of communicating these different things that are happening in the department. So that's a flavor of the science communication careers I'm doing, the one with the sharks and the one at university. And then how I got here is a question that I often get. And my background is I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in a suburb of Flint, Michigan that's called Davison. I went to community college, Go Mott Bears, and then transferred over to Michigan State University and did a degree in zoology. And I loved it. I loved being in the field. I loved doing research. I was very, in particular, interested in predators and prey, mostly inspired by the the red-tailed hawks that were in my yard. I've got white-tailed deer and red-tailed hawks that are competing in my brain at the moment. But with the hawks in my yard, I was really interested in predator prey. From there, I was my senior year of college. I was looking for an independent study and met up with Dr. Michael Gottfried, who is a shark jaw specialist and looking at the evolution of sharks. And he said, I have shark skulls. Do you want to dissect them for your senior year project? And I said, yes, I'm never going to say no to that. So I spent a lot of time at Michigan State University Museum dissecting a lot of these skulls, and then we were doing CT scans of them. During that time, I asked him, well, where are these sharks coming from? Obviously not from the Great Lakes. There are no sharks in the Great Lakes. And he said, well, these are from South Africa, these white sharks that we're working from. And that he had been to South Africa, he loved it, he thought it was great as a researcher, and maybe I should take a look and see if there are internships or opportunities down there. Knowing absolutely nothing, Googled, internship, shark, South Africa, and ended up at a really great project and ended up staying for about 4 years and completing my master's down there. Sold my Volkswagen to get the plane ticket to go down to South Africa. So I was all in on this working out. And it was while I was down there, I met a lot of the people that I work with today on the Discovery Channel, a lot of the producers who come down and do a lot of the white shark filming, a lot of the same people that are doing it today that I met then. So it was nice to make these kind of network of connections as well. And then after South Africa, actually while I was in South Africa, I was working at a nonprofit. They really needed somebody who could do a lot of the PR. A lot of us were public scientists. We gave a lot of presentations. We spoke with stakeholders a lot.
And what is PR? Could you?
So like public relations.
Gotcha.
Okay, so making sure that people understand the type of research that's happening and how it connects to their daily lives. And that was a trial by fire. I found out that actually I really enjoyed that side of research, the challenge of communicating something that seems so far offshore and not important to the daily lives of people and making those connections with their values back on land. And that steered me towards this career of science communication and staying in that lane. Started working at different nonprofits, again, mostly in sort of either community building or public relations type roles, and then came here to NC State to basically do similar at the Department of Applied Ecology. So that's the short version of the story. And that does not include, very importantly for the folks that are listening, that does not include all the failures along the way, all the applications that I never got back, all the things that go into these stories. There's about 10 different avenues that didn't work out on the way to get there. So yeah, that's the short version, and I won't take up any more time, so you can have some time to speak as well.
All right, and so now we can jump into Adrian's presentation. So, yeah.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good to be here with you. I'm Adrian Smith. I'm actually a researcher here at the museum. I work in the Nature Research Center, which is the building attached to the giant globe. And my research lab is a glass-walled lab at the museum. You can see me in the lab doing some stuff, usually typing on a computer, but sometimes doing fun stuff like filming insects. So my work comes out in two different ways, and it's kind of communicated in two different ways, two different audiences. One is science communication to a peer audience, so that's doing research and writing it up for a peer-reviewed journal article. And the other half of that is doing work that comes out more in sort of a public sort of facing way to a public audience. And that's through avenues like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, but also on our local PBS network, PBS North Carolina, on the show Science C. So I produce segments for that. So my work really fits into sort of the mission of the museum, is that, natural history museums exist to sort of explore and discover and learn about the natural world, and they also exist to exhibit that knowledge and to provide sort of a public interface for what it means to be alive on the planet. And I feel like my work is a small sort of subsection of that too, but I kind of do both those things too. As I said, my public-facing stuff mostly comes out through YouTube and then other platforms beyond that, and most of it focuses on insects and arthropods. Both my research is on that channel, but also the research of my colleagues and various other stories sort of about science or animals, sort of insect natural history. If I would have, someone would have told me when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, what I do today, I would have been totally confused. And my answer would have been, what? What? That's a job? I had no idea. I'd never met anybody who'd done anything with insects for a living. Probably not even met like pest control people, actually. I didn't know you could do this professionally as a job. My parents don't have college degrees. No one in my family graduated from college, so I was completely clueless that this was a thing I could do. And I stumbled into it when I was an undergraduate at Florida State University. I grew up half of my childhood in Florida, and so I went to a big public university there and in Tallahassee. I grew up where that star is, just north of Tampa. And I started working in a job to pay for part of my college at Florida State. And the job happened to be an ant research lab. And so again, my reaction was like, "You guys do what? Are you serious? Your entire lives are researching ants?" So I worked there for about 3.5 or 4 years. There's me as an undergrad in a 7 foot deep pit that we dug to get out a harvester ant nest from Florida. I'm standing up. I'm 6'4". I'm standing up in that picture. I couldn't get out of the pit. Someone had to help me out of
Wow.
the pit. So it's like cool experiences like that. Again, sort of filled in like, this is, wow, you can do this as a job? It's like, sign me up. So this is the first Florida ant that I worked on for about a decade or so. This is a trap jaw ant. Maybe if you know anything about ants, you might have heard about this one. It's kind of a famous one. It's famous because of its mandibles, its jaws that it can snap shut, sort of like a bear trap. Its head is huge and it's filled with muscles that are used to deform an internal spring, and all that releases when two little sets of hairs are tickled. Those are the trigger hairs. And when something bumps into that, they send the signal and release the snap of the jaws, and they snap shut like this. And you can see some of this in action here. Here's some trap jaw ants in the field eating one of their favorite meals, the hot dogs of the insect world, termites. Everybody loves a termite. So you'll see this trap jaw ant worker snapping on this termite, and she'll eventually incapacitated enough to pick it up and bring it into the nest. Here's one. They seem ferocious, and they are ferocious, but they're ferocious at a different scale than us humans. So they're not quite as ferocious to us. The big blob on the right side of the screen here is the tip of my finger to scale, and here you're going to see this trapjaw ant snap at my finger. It won't do any harm to my finger, but all that force gets translated and knocked back into the body of the ant and sends it plummeting to its doom back on the floor of the lab. Here's that pulled out, and all that energy, it didn't jump with its legs. That's all that energy is from its jaws and sort of reflecting back off a hard surface like my finger. So I studied them in many different contexts. Some not as exciting as those videos, like chemical communication, like how they talk to each other, how they figure out who belongs in a nest, who doesn't, and some interesting ecological interactions, like how they, interact with their other nests or other ant colonies in their sort of environments or other ant species. The picture on the right is something I've dubbed Florida's skull collecting ant, because you see all around it are those little round things are head cases of trapjaw ants. If you dig up a nest of this Formica archboldi ant, it's filled with empty skulls of trapjaw ants. I'm not going to tell you why. You can look that up on your own. Just Google Florida's skull collecting ant. You'll find some cool stuff about it. So right now, my work focuses on extraordinary creatures that are in our neighborhoods. And in fact, most of my research is happening on things that occur in my backyard, like these little critters. These are not insects. They used to be insects when I went to college. They're not anymore. They're just outside of insects. They're hexapods, and these are globular springtails. You'll see another cameo from my finger here in a second to give you some scale. Here it comes. This giant thing is my finger. You'll see that springtail disappear instantly. And so it's actually jumping, and here you see it captured with a normal camera filming at 30 frames per second, and what you see in 1/30th of a second in the frame is just a little streak, a little curly hue streak, and that's the distance it's traveling in that amount of time. So to actually see what it does and what it's doing, you have to take it to the lab and film it with some high-speed cameras. Here are some sequences at 4,300 frames per second. Here's a collection of springtails, and you can see that they're only about 1 millimeter in height. They can jump about 60 or so millimeters high. And here's an up-close one at about 11,000 frames per second. You can see their spring-loaded tail, their spring tail, flops sort of underneath their body and catapults them into the air. Here's sort of our best view of what a springtail does to jump. Something I filmed about a year ago. There's a globular springtail doing that. So these occur in your backyard. They occur in my backyard. I just live in town here in Raleigh. These ones are active, finishing their active season right now. Believe it or not, there's some species that do this on the surface of water too. So this is a globular springtail that's on the surface of water, and it's about to jump here. This one jumps about 20 body lengths, and in that span of time does about 20 backflips to go that same distance. And sometimes they're good at landing, sometimes they're not. This one lands face first and floats off in shame. So, bugs are bugs. And part of what I do is try to film sort of well-studied things and present them so that people can engage with insects that might be occurring in their lives around their yards, around their houses in new ways. So I like to sort of do insect natural history sort of videos too. And here's a couple moths. Again, these are ones that occur if you live in the eastern U.S. Probably occur in your backyard. Both of these come to my backyard. Here's one of the most glorious moths on earth. That's a rosy maple moth. It is a real creature, although it does look like a Muppet. It is not a Muppet. It's shockingly bright orange and pink. Just amazing silk moth that's relatively common. And here you see what it looks like flying in super slow motion. You see it's covered in all this dense fur. It's really sort of an incredible creature. The next one up is my favorite backyard moth. This thing is about as big as your hand. It is huge. This is a polyphemus moth. The cool things about this is notice the transparent parts in its wings, those eye spots. They look like eye spots on the top part of its wing. And again, look at the dense sort of coverage of scales that are fur-like. This thing kind of, to me, looks like a giant flying carpet from the 80s that you might find in your parents' basement. It's just an incredible moth. And lastly, this is a cool sequence I filmed a few months ago. I've only seen this filmed in slow motion one other time. This is, believe it or not, an earwig. If you didn't know, earwigs have wings. A lot of them have wings. And they don't just have wings. They have the most complexly folded wings out of all animals. This creature folds its wings to be 20 times smaller than they are. Watch it unfurl.
Wow.
You can see they're like giant translucent parachutes. Just incredible. I've been trying to film an earwig in flight for years, and finally found one species in southern Florida that would fly for me on camera. So that's basically what I do and my research here at the museum.
All right, so we've got quite a few questions already, just from myself, and so everyone who is live on Zoom, feel free to drop those in the chat right now, and we will get to those. But first, Adrian, you mentioned that you were a first-generation college student, and are you as well, Michelle? So, so this is someone who is the first person in their family to go to college, and what was that like, and like what were those expectations from your parents and from yourself, or like what you've seen on TV or like what you've heard, and how did that actually play out in reality?
Well, I guess when I was in high school, I didn't visit any universities, and I just applied to the two big state universities in Florida, and I only got into one, so I went there. But the first time I went there for orientation was the first time I've been on the campus.
Okay, so yeah,
It's like and I went in undeclared too, so I didn't quite know what to do. I had some ideas. But one idea was I thought, oh, maybe I should go to film school. They have a cool film school here at Florida State. But then it turned out to be one of those programs that you had to like apply to as like a 16-year-old and have like a whole, resume and work. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm not doing that. That's not an option. Yeah, but the expectation there wasn't really any expectation besides just to go to school and do a good job and find something that you like, and I'm just happened to stumble into something that sort of fit my interests pretty well. So I don't know, most advice I give people is just you don't have to have your whole future figured out. When things present themselves, it's kind of like you're taking a best guess at what might work out, and you just roll with it and see where it takes you, and as long as you're open to opportunities show up, and you just kind of walk down those paths. At least for me, it was like that.
Yeah, and Michelle, you mentioned that you took the path of going to community college first, right, before going to a university. And so, like, how was that a bit different?
Yeah, well, let me first say and get a shout out to my older sister who cleared the path a little bit before I did by going to college. But between the two of us, we were the first ones to go, and community college is great. I'm a huge advocate of community college. It helped with some of the logistics of getting a lot of that coursework out of the way before you get to a bigger school. And was just a really valuable experience for me to try and help figure out what I wanted to do. But I still, like you, Adrian, didn't really know when I finally got to the state school. Also, the first time I was there when I was moving in, right? I had never been there. Yeah, and likewise, I started off as a music major. And then also I was like, oh yeah, this music school is like way bigger of a deal than I am prepared to get into. Went into environmental engineering after that, realized I wasn't a good fit for that, and then settled in zoology, which worked at the time and still works for me now.
Yeah.
I think one of the advantages, and I agree with your advice, that there's no path. The idea that you have to have everything figured out, which is an unfortunate kind of career lesson that we give people, is not true. So you don't have to have everything figured out. And I think a huge advantage of being first generation is I feel like some of the most creative ideas come from first generation students. I can almost tell first generation students when I'm working with them because they just tend to look at things in a different way. And I think that's a huge advantage to being first generation too.
Yeah, and this is a theme that we've seen across practically all of our presenters so far is none of them knew that this is exactly what they wanted to do, when they were younger, like even when they started college for most people. I know I can say the same for myself. If you would have asked me 3 years ago what I think I'd be doing, this was not necessarily it. But I'm happy at how the dominoes fell.
Yeah.
And so we have a couple of questions from people in the chat. So Brittany asks, have you both ever collaborated on a project together? If so, what was the project? If not, do you have any plans to do so?
Not yet. Not yet. I am desperately trying to pull Adrian into.
I missed that part. What happened?
So plans to collaborate together on?
No, not yet. But there are a lot of shared interests. There's quite a few very cool bug projects in applied ecology, and I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it.
And then we have a question from Will. So if you do not have an established platform in which you publish your content, so like a YouTube or blog or TikTok or whatever, how have you navigated in what direction to go with a story or a topic? I think, Adrian, like you pretty much got a brand of Ant Lab. Sorry. So like you kind of have that as like your go-to platform. Michelle, is that the same way with you? Like, do you have a go-to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of this with my two brains. So there's my brain for me professionally, and then the brain for the Department of Applied Ecology and the choices that you make into where those things go, because they're similar kind of things to think about. Which platform you go on? I just heard Adrian say this to my class on Tuesday, so I'm going to actually skip over that one now. But I 100% agree with what you're about to say. Okay. So I'll leave that stinger for Adrian there. But you also want to consider like what are the strengths of the story that you're already trying to tell. So if you have something that's highly visual, do that.
Right.
If you have something that has incredible audio, like the bees did, I'm going to highly focus on the audio from the beehives that we recorded the other day. So looking at what are kind of the parts of the content from the story that are already good, and then that can help you kind of select down to the platform as well. That's one way to think about it. Another way of thinking about it is different audiences use different platforms very differently. So if there are very targeted folks that you absolutely want to talk to, they're going to be using a platform differently from other ones, whether that's based on age, whether that's based on interest, whether that's based on if your content's like a how do you X type thing versus a just really awe-inspiring type video, those will make some differences in where you go.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess about what you're referring to. I think maybe is it the create content for the platforms that you consume and interact with the most?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Such great advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Like whatever sort of media you find yourself gravitating towards as a consumer, it can really provide you a leg up in when you think about, what can I do? Like I think I could do that, or I wish there were more videos like this on this channel or on this platform or whatever. It's just easier to make stuff for a place and in a medium that you already interact with and know what that medium sort of is and what pieces of content are on that. I think the other important thing is that when you're starting out, that you're your most important audience member, and that you're in the mode of just kind of making stuff that you have a really good sort of self-generated sense for why this thing should exist. Like, when I started making videos, I wasn't particularly good at it, and I didn't have 1,000 subscribers for like the first 5 years of trying to put stuff on YouTube. But in those years of making stuff, like I knew I was making stuff that like no one else was making, even though it wasn't particularly good, or I didn't really understand YouTube at that stage of making stuff. I knew that like the stuff had a good reason for existing in the first place, and that was all that mattered. And so the audience came eventually, but there was still like I wouldn't get too bummed out when 100 people watched it, because I had a good reason for why I made the thing, and it has a good reason for existing.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether people watch it or not, like it has a reason for being.
Yeah.
So then that's kind of all that was needed in the beginning.
Yep.
It's the intrinsic motivation rather than I want to do this thing for views and likes and whatnot.
And an important part to that too, especially when you're starting out, and that it's not a steady line of that you just get followers or likes or things, that it's just a steady thing. For a long time, I can agree, 5 years, 6 years, it's a flat line at like 10, 20 people. And then suddenly there's this thing that catches interest. And then and that's how it always goes. It's this jump of plateaus. So yeah, don't feel too bummed out about those things.
Yeah, and I think that kind of segues into a next question of like, do you have any viral moments or things that have like, why did this get so many views, or like things that were just not intended to go viral, or I don't think that's kind of like a misnomer. You can't make something go viral. Viral things on the internet just kind of happen. You don't know what people are going to cling to, what people are going to turn into memes. So yeah, do you have any viral moments that you care to share?
No, none.
It's like, I'm sure we can scrounge through your YouTube channel.
Google, actually, I'll deliver a few. No, I think one of my favorite viral moments are when things I say on TV get turned into GIFs. I want to find a way to like list that on my CV somehow, because I feel like that's once you become a GIF, that's when you're like, okay, I've established myself in the internet zeitgeist somehow. But no, I mean, Crazy Shark stuff goes viral for the weirdest things. I think one of the weirdest phenomenon about viral things is that you might expect that the viral thing that happens today is something that maybe you filmed a week ago. It's not true. The most viral thing that I had happen with a video was something that was filmed 3 years prior. But for whatever reason on that time, it just became this really viral thing. So that I have never been able to understand. Adrian, maybe you can.
Sometimes I'm surprised by what gets picked up and what doesn't, in terms of like the intentional things I put out on the internet. Like what some clips I put out of that earwig that I showed have been played like 12 million times, like on TikTok. And I think that's because I didn't realize people were so grossed out about earwigs and all of the like, duets are people like screaming and crying into their phone while watching this video because they're so grossed out by earwigs. I had no idea that people were grossed out by earwigs are not gross. But they are, I guess.
I think it's the name. I think it's the name.
If I would have known that, I would have leaned more into that when I put it out on the internet, but I didn't. And then, I've had a picture of me from elementary school got turned into a meme a few years ago, and that kind of went like viral. Kind of the story where I figured out that it was a meme and it had its own meme life, but you can Google that one. You just search for if you search for 90s laser grade school portraits, I'm like the second or third.
Oh, gosh.
Explore it from there.
Again, it's a thing that happened years ago that suddenly went viral for no reason. And so back to
Back to reality.
some of our other things. So Michelle, you mentioned that you kind of picked up and moved across the entire globe.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like, and, leaving behind your friends and your family, and what was very familiar to you? Like, have you already traveled, or was that kind of your first big endeavor?
Yeah, so first off, acknowledging the huge amount of privilege affiliated with something like that, and being able to, as an American, freely travel a lot of the places in the world without having to get a visa, etc. Yeah, college was this kind of eye-opening moment for me too. And I think it comes back to that first generation thing where I started to realize, oh, if I can do this, then I can do that too. And I see people doing stuff like this. Maybe I can do that too. So the first time I ever traveled outside of the country was to the Antarctic. That was my first ever international. I was like, Argentina, Ushuaia, here we go.
Yeah.
And was part of a undergraduate research program, which I was supposed to be studying leopard seals, didn't see a single one. Had to come back and very convincingly scientifically communicate how good failure is in the research process. But so going to South Africa, I was already kind of primed, like, yes, I did that trip. I can go here and do this trip. I never expected, I think I was supposed to be there for 3 weeks, and I was not planning to stay as long as I did. But once I got there, I just decided, yeah, this place works for me. I can see an opportunity for me. I'm just going to do whatever to do it, which meant doing a lot of really bad jobs sometimes. It meant working, positions that maybe I would advise current students never to go work. But it was really foundational for me to just kind of figure out what was possible.
Yeah.
And to get used to failing at stuff. Because if you can master that ability, not getting good at things, if you can master the ability to just fail and skip along, just carry on going, I think that's a much more valuable skill in life. And that South Africa was a trial by fire for me about that.
Yeah. And, well, Adrian, you said that you pretty much stayed local to Florida most of the time. Do you wish you had done things differently and, traveled to some other state or some other country for school, or?
No, not really. I mean, I did some internet, I went to Central America a few times in graduate school, and then I went to graduate school in Arizona. So that was different from Florida, obviously. But no, I try to work on things locally that I can, get to, because of it's just hard to study things internationally and bring them back and work on them and have an only limited 3-week window in which you can gather stuff, and I prefer to work on local stuff.
Okay. Yeah, and then so we have a question from R, who asks, how do you get such tiny creatures to stay in shot on camera? And where can I watch the bloopers?
How do I get them to stay on camera? I don't very well. It just takes hours and hours until one of them appears on camera. The high-speed cameras, you press record after the action has happened, so they're called post triggers.
Oh.
So something that you see it flash on screen, or you see a thing jump or fly, and if it appears like it went on camera, then you press record and it records the previous 10 seconds or whatever. So it's a little bit different from just how normal cameras work. So that makes it a little bit easier, but it's just it's a lot of wrangling, and it's a lot of a stationary camera and moving the stage where the insect is in and out of focus until you get one shot that works. The bloopers, uh, uh, they're they usually don't get recorded, and when they are recorded, um, the best blooper would be putting a camera behind where you're filming this, so you can just see like us sweating and like me on my hands and knees on the ground looking for a flea that like jumped out of frame and I can't find it anymore, and I'm just like crawling around on the floor. Those are the true bloopers. I
Oh,
have not
man.
filmed that yet, but it
There you
does
go.
happen.
Next
Dude,
video.
that's
Yeah.
there's the content right there.
And I have a comment about the cameras too. So the camera that Adrian uses is the same camera, same type of camera that the slow-mo shark stuff
Yeah.
was too. So these high frame rate cameras are just really special, especially for that post trigger that they have for being able to capture
Yeah.
that natural history in the moment.
Oh yeah, yeah. Here we can pull up some of the videos from
Why not?
Michelle's
Why not
earlier
watch
thing. Just so everyone who joined a little bit later can see some of those shots of the sharks jumping out of the water.
Yeah, so likewise, you have somebody in the back of the boat as we tow a decoy. You see him in the bottom corner here. They're standing still with that camera ready to hit. And now, so, because you're never going to get it in time, right? But this is that post trigger that Adrian's talking about. It's already recorded it in its memory, and you're just telling it, okay, save
Actually
that
save
recording.
that portion.
Yeah.
That I learned something completely new about these types of camera. I just always thought it was someone with a really huge SD card, sitting there
Well, it is a huge-
recording
it is,
every
yeah.
moment, and just trying
It
to
is.
trying to get things up. So yeah, so that's great. And this kind of leads into this next question of how has science communication changed over the years with the advent of like social media and things like TikTok is probably the most recent, foray into a different form of science communication. How has that changed, the way that you try to communicate science? And, you mentioned trying to stick to platforms that you yourself use and consume. Um, how has that kind of shaken things up?
Mm.
Just like,
I think well, there's no gatekeepers anymore. And user generated content, so you don't have to, to communicate to a big audience, you don't have to get on the news. You don't have to like pitch your things to a journalist. You don't have to like get a TV show. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to wait for your institution to talk about your work. You can just talk about it yourself. And you can have a direct public interface for what you do and what you are as a scientist, which is the thing that all social media platforms are built on. It's connecting people to other people, and it's personifying. That's why typically people do better than institutions on these platforms. It's because it's all about one person having a profile and then following other people to see what they're up to and to hear from them. And scientists themselves are really well positioned to, if they're into this stuff, represent themselves and their work directly to a public audience. Even more so than institutions, I think, because just think about it. It's a post on social media that's an institution saying like, a scientist here did this thing, here's what they say about it, versus the actual scientist on screen saying like, I did this, I think it's really cool, let me tell you about it, let me show you it. And then you get to hear about science, you get to meet the person that did it too, which is like that's what social media is all about. So I think that totally changed everything. about science communication in sort of this platform online world.
Yeah.
I totally agree. As the person who writes both of those things, I totally agree. As the institution and the researcher, what social media has done has created a channel for trust in a way that you had to go through some other vector to get access to science, and now you don't need that vector anymore. You can get it straight from the researcher, which I think is great. I think another generally, yeah, social media, it's a volatile place in the sense that platforms come and go very quickly. They get popular, they go away, they get banned, that you can't use them. Like there's a lot of things that can happen. So having flexibility and adaptability as a institution or a brand is important. But also another tactic or another tact to that question that I wanted to talk about was the advances in things like cameras. We've just talked about the slow motion camera, but things like drones have changed marine worlds forever. Things like GoPros have changed everything that we can see. You know, the amount of time that we can spend recording underwater has changed dramatically. And that too has removed gatekeepers from collecting that type of content or recording that type of thing. These are affordable ways that people can make their own recordings about the natural history that's happening nearby. And I think that's been super, super amazing to see as well.
Yeah. And so with the reduction of some of these barriers and gatekeepers, that's typically a good thing, and 9 times out of 10 it is. But have you noticed that there's been a surge of misinformation as well? Of like anybody with a platform now can just post anything. I could just say, yeah, earwigs are called earwigs because they crawl in people's ears, and that's why but that's not actually true, right? So how, or have you seen that side of it too? And how does that make the science communicator and you feel like, oh, do I need to correct this person? And how do you pick and choose those battles of um, when to try to correct content or a person or um, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It, from my standpoint, yeah. I mean, if more people have access to communicating, you're going to have more of everybody that's going to join that. Miscommunicators have always existed. People who maybe intentionally missell information for their own values or gains has always been a problem. And social media is something that's amplified that in a big way. The culture of influencers is also something that can be utilized for good, and it can be like, right, there's the light side and the dark side of this,
Right.
and all of it. I think when it comes to me and what battles do you choose, usually I don't choose any of them. Usually I just stick to my lane of either as an institution, I'm here to provide information, I'm here to provide compelling information. It's not really my job to tell people what they need to do with that information, but more that we're the source for this information if you're looking for it. And being a source of expertise. That's my institution hat. My shark hat, though, on the other hand, if people have, for me personally, if somebody's asking me a genuine question that's courteous, I will have no problem spending time talking to that person.
Yeah.
But if somebody approaches me and they're swearing or they're mean, I block them. And I don't even think about it. I'm just over it.
Blocking out the haters.
Yeah, I, literally. It's just, I've gone down too many pits of that where I'm just like, you know what? It's just the anger, I don't know, compulsion online is just too easy for people to wade into.
Yeah. Do you have any experiences, Adrian, of
I don't do much of misinformation counteracting that at all. It's just too much cool information that needs to be put out in the first place. So I try to just I try to represent myself as a trustworthy source of expertise in this narrow thing, and I tend not to go outside of that public representation of the media that I put on the internet, because I changing minds is a tricky and difficult, if not impossible, thing. But what I think is most important is that there are sources out there and available for people if they are deciding like, is that true? Like what, then Google earwigs. Do earwigs really fly? And like, I want them to find my video that's like a cool explanation of it, not saying like you might have heard the earwigs go into people's ears and like lay eggs. I'm here to tell you it's wrong. Like I'm not gonna do that. So, but
What
I
scientists don't want you to know.
Right.
yeah. Yeah, so I just put out kind of one style of content, and usually I don't think I've ever done any sort of debunking content at all. I don't have any plans to either.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we have a question from Brittany who asks to Michelle, when you're interviewing researchers for a news release, how do you decide what questions to
Ooh.
ask? And do you have questions that you always ask?
Yes. Yes. So, I'm blanking on what they are, Brittany. But yeah, especially writing news releases, those are a bit more, I don't want to say calculated, but they do run a format. They themselves have a format in themselves. So there are particular questions that I like to ask researchers. What got them interested in that topic to begin with? Do they see any broader impacts to the results of their work? Clear explanations of what those results are in their own words. And doing as much as I can to get the researchers to talk about it themselves without necessarily me having to write too much about it. I'd rather have, like what Adrian's talking about, have the researcher represent that science for themselves, rather than me, the staff writer, writing it up for them. Yeah, there are those kind of boilerplate questions that I always ask, but then what I love about interviewing researchers is just kind of going off into the curiosity deep end about things and just starting to dream weirdly and bigly about what the next project could be. Like if you had $10 million, what would you do?
Yeah.
Like, what's the next thing? And dreaming big about their particular field, because not a lot, all of the people that I work with are just fascinating people, and they've chosen these fields, and the fields are fascinating. So yeah, the problem that I have, honestly, is sticking to my hour-long Zoom window with researchers and saying, okay, I've got to get these questions done. Like, we can talk about the cool stuff in a minute, but like, I've got to get this out too. So yeah, it's a mix of both.
Okay. And for Adrian, so Jesse asks, how hard is it to find a queen ant with wings?
Oh, boy. It depends. Well, if you're looking in the right season, it can be relatively easy if it's common. So there are seasonal mating flights of a lot of ants, and June, July, May around here in North Carolina are great times to find newly mated winged queens flying around. I actually almost all of my research does not start with just a single queen. So I actually go out and collect mature nests and dig up entire colonies, which can be difficult when you've spent a few hours and you're 6 feet underground, and you're guessing whether or not that next shovel of dirt is gonna slice above or below a queen or through a queen. It might happen. So that can be its own challenge too. But with enough practice, it becomes relatively easy. But as far as winged queens, again, it's like a seasonal thing. So it's really just catching them after that mating flight. Like after rain and a nice sunny day, there'll be a lot out flying, and you can catch them pretty easy then.
Yeah, and so completely unrelated question, but still insect related. Is it true that insects can't take fall damage?
No. So some insects are very small, where their like terminal velocity isn't going to do much in terms of force because their mass is so tiny. So for some it's true, but for others it's not. They can definitely hurt themselves from falling off the stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know.
Get it right, Marvel. Get it right.
So I'm sorry. There's a huge list of questions here.
That's great. Keep 'em going.
Okay. So for Michelle, what is your favorite shark species and its coolest adaptation?
Man.
And Adrian, same question, but for insect
Oh.
species and coolest adaptation.
I don't get to tell about sharks.
I mean, you can.
Talk about
You can.
Let's
Oh,
switch.
let's do that. Let's do that. So, Adrian, your favorite shark species and their adaptation, and Michelle, your favorent insect and their adaptation.
I don't know anything about sharks. I don't have one. I don't know. Why do hammerheads have that weird
Out.
head?
There you go.
What's cool about hammerheads too is that they recently figured out that they don't swim like vertically; they swim in a counter because that's more aerodynamic.
Really?
So they never swim like straight.
Straight
They're
on.
always tilted,
Interesting.
which is wild. Yeah, absolutely wild.
That's a good one.
That's wild.
That's
Yeah,
mine. That's mine.
that's a good one. I think, and I also know nothing about insects, so I'm just gonna go with your classic, firefly. I love fireflies. They're just
Yeah.
so, when I see them, just something special happens with me.
And we can also tell that you must not be around from these parts. Fireflies?
Yeah,
They're
sorry. Lightning bug.
Like, yeah. So that's fun, and we just saw it here of like scientists are pretty niche a lot of the time. We like our interests and we kind of dig ourselves into these interests, and then like it's like name an insect. I'm like, I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I was like, I can't see earwig. I can't see earwig. Something
So yeah, like that, that's a fun thing, and I think that's one of the best parts about collaborating with different scientists is you get to have these peepholes into like their niche interest, and seeing it what is the overlap, and like what is the overlap between these microscopic insects and sharks? Are there, millions of years ago, insert a paleontologist here of like, oh yes, there was some interaction, and all of these things.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at, I think one of the cool things, honestly, like a thread that connects these really well. And Adrian, tell me when I go totally wrong with this. Sharks and insects have existed for a very long time,
Yeah.
and they're very good-ish with change. So one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of shark populations is with global climate change, there are winners in the shark world.
Really?
Like they are ready to expand their niches, and it's not for all species going to be a sum negative. Some of them are going to do well and benefit in a way from a warmer ocean.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the same can be said for insects, but they can find a way to adapt to change fast because they've done it 5-6 times.
Yeah. I mean, what is it? Sharks are older than the rings of Saturn,
Yeah.
just
Older than trees.
older than trees,
Yeah.
which is a wild thing to try to conceptualize. These things that have done it and done it well, and done it well multiple times.
Multiple times.
So who knows? It won't be cockroaches that take over the world after a nuclear apocalypse. It'll be sharks.
White sharks and earwigs. Here we go.
So to both, R asks, what advice do you give to people wanting to pursue science communication as a profession? And are there certain skills that are required or unique challenges you have faced? So it's like general advice.
Sure.
And then
My main advice is to do stuff and come with a portfolio and come with examples of your work. And that if you're producing stuff, it becomes easier to convince someone that they should hire you to keep producing similar or derivative things from that. I think part of the reasons why I got this job is because as a postdoc, I started making a lot of media to communicate my research. So I was doing a podcast for a while. I was just getting into videos and putting out, videos about my science and the science of colleagues. And I think that really helped me secure this job in that I was already sort of producing and publishing a bunch of this stuff kind of on my own. So it was really kind of just practice and getting, examples of work out there. And so that people can associate what you do with making media or communicating in a certain way.
100% agree. The portfolio is really important. There are many ways to be a professional science communicator now, whether through yourself and your own research or like a role that I have working at an institution. There are way more of those today than there were even 5 years ago. And there are way more training programs at universities to help people sharpen their skills and understanding some of the things like better understanding audiences, better practicing listening, which is the most important part of communicating, is listening to audiences, understanding their values, understanding the issues or questions that they have. And relationship building is a huge part of science communication too, just making sure that you yourself are seen as a trusted source for the researchers that you work with, that they know that they can come to you. And also that the community members that you regularly work with know that you're this kind of liaison of a person that they can come to as well. So yeah, I will also do a shameless plug of the Science Communicators of North Carolina that you can get on Skunk. I do happen to be the president of it. But this is also another one of many regional congresses of science writers across the country where we're looking to help people in their journey of being science communicators in whatever form that takes. So there's trainings and other things. So sign up on the website, you'll see it.
So yeah, Science Communicators of North Carolina. Check that out.
Thank you very much.
And so here's a last question before we wrap up the recording part. Do you all ever feel drained from trying to personally market yourself, or like trying to do your own form of personal branding? And have you experienced these symptoms of burnout from trying to, sustain that level of like content production and whatnot? Just
Luckily for me, I have a day job. So I think if I was depending on the, gig to gig or, X number of views per month for personal revenue, I think I would, yeah, for sure, like be freaking out all the time. But fortunately, my job, I've kind of shoehorned what I do and the science communication thing is to be part of my professional output and part of why and what I do as a scholar. So I think that's helped me avoid some of that stuff. And again, to sort of weigh myself and my own intentions and the internal things about the media that I produce as being higher valued than the digital performance of the things. Like, if it doesn't get a 10,000 views, 100,000 views, I don't really have to see it as a failure. I can reframe it as like, cool, well, this information didn't exist yet. People aren't searching for like, what do jumping plant lice look like? Like, so what? Of course, I'm not going to get 100,000 views on a video about plant lice. But like, who else is going to make a video about plant lice? Like, nobody.
Right.
So
you found that niche, and so
yeah. But I think if I had to answer to other pressures of like, you have to do this stuff freelance or gig to gig or just reliant on response and clicks for income, then it would be a different game. So I think it's just for me a situational thing that I can fortunately avoid a lot of that in the way that I frame what I do.
I am in the same boat. I 100% agree. I say no to things way more than I say yes. Part of the TV platform as well is that you can get pulled or requested to be in a lot of different shows that maybe don't, either I'm not actually a good expert for that topic, or it's just a topic that I think is bananas and don't necessarily want to, invest time or energy into. So having the ability to say no to stuff is super handy, and having that day job takes a lot of that type of personal branding off of it. For the second part of that question, when it comes to burnout, oh yeah, I think all creatives experience some sort of burnout after a while where you think, God, I'm going to write this again, or I'm going to sit and I'm going to write about whatever again, or I know that this type of Instagram post does well, so I'm going to post the same thing in like 6 months, and it can start to feel a bit repetitive. But in moments like that, I focus on the long game of it and just making sure that, and I'm speaking more from an institutional standpoint here, that maintaining that momentum is important again for the overall arching goals of the who we want to connect to on those different platforms.
Right.
Though there can be parts of it that feel a little burnouty.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so any last words of advice for folks for the recorded part of the session? Any last thoughts?
I'll just repeat one thing I said before: go out and fail. Go out and fail.
Go out and fail.
Go get rejected. Go get rejected. Go get rejected. Put in a paper. Get it rejected. Get it rejected. And just get used to the practice of failing. If you're good at that practice of failing, none of it will faze you, and you can carry on with your really creative endeavors. You'll feel more confident in what you pick up and what you say no to. So just go out there and do the things. Don't worry about being rejected. You will be rejected. Practice it. It's just whatever career you go into, practice that experience. It's good for you.
Yeah, same thing applies to creative work. Like, go create something. Don't get, burnt out or disappointed when, nobody watches it or clicks like or retweets it or whatever. The point is you making it, and just be okay with that. And the more and more you make stuff, just, learn something new every time you make something, and just make it better each time. Just keep cranking it up until all of a sudden you're making stuff that's like undeniable. People can't resist, the click. But yeah, it's the same thing. It's just practice and just do it for yourself.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, Michelle and Adrian, and everyone who was able to join us live. So we're going to wrap up the recording soon. But before we go, if you'd like to hang on and have a chance to unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras and talk directly to us, just hang on for just a second. But join us next month for the next session of professional previews with Dr. Carlos Galler and microbiology. And also, March 11th, which is next Saturday, we have Reptile and Amphibian Day here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. The theme this year is vipers. So come on out. It'll be from 10 to 5 p.m. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.